So a book that I finished reading recently is C.G. Jung, Carl Gustav Jung's Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, which is his autobiography. I finished this on. I was busy kind of lately, and I was on the road when I finished this. I was traveling for a bit, but Carl Gustav Jung, for those who are unfamiliar with him, is a one of the leading early psychoanalysts. He actually created the field of analytical psychology. He was a psychologist, unlike Sigmund Freud, and a lot of his what he's mostly famous for in retrospect is his theories on the unconscious and the his theories on myths and archetypes and all of that sort of stuff. This book is not about his not this book is not necessarily about his theories of sorts, while he does mention them and he makes reference to them constantly throughout the book. It is actually more of an autobiography. Again, it's about his life. It's about what he came through, what he came upon, and how he changed his views on different things, and how he developed internally. What I found very fascinating about the book is that Jung describes his internal experiences as much more important to him than his external ones, to the extent that which I read the whole book, and a lot of what you actually learn about him is not, again, it's not about what happened to him, it's about what happened within him, which I think is a very interesting distinction to make when people talk about what is, as an autobiography. For perhaps if you want to learn more about his actual day-to-day life, what he was doing and what he was writing about, or where he was going and who he was meeting, and the confrontations he's had with different intellectual figures throughout the 20th century, this is not the book that you get those things in. This is not necessarily a historical book of himself. It's a book, again, that draws a lot on, again, I guess the title is perfect, his memories, his dreams, and his reflections. And again, with that being said, a lot of the book is him reflecting on his dreams. He dictates his entirety of his childhood as a series of recurring dreams and nightmares he was experiencing. And I have to tell you the truth, while reading the book, I really spread out the book over the past month. Maybe for the last few weeks, I was really just trying to slowly read through it, and I guess in the spirit of the book, I think it would be best to kind of describe my experiences reading it internally as well. I have been having the most vivid of dreams ever since reading this book. I think I seem to have really been more cognizant, perhaps, of the dealings of the subconscious in my daily life, and it has been manifesting for me personally through the vividness of the dreams I've been having. Carl Jung is very fascinating for me, and what drew me to Jung, and as well as Dostoevsky and all this stuff, is the interest in different thinkers who put a lot of gravity in the internal experience of the human being, or the subconscious, because I have come to experience over the last year or so that my phenomenology of sorts of day-to-day life has felt the phenomenology of sorts of the internal experiences that I kind of have in my day-to-day life seems to have been untouched, or at least uncovered, not uncovered too much. And I feel like once you become more cognizant of those aspects of your personality, of the way in which you act, and perhaps the metaphysical truths in which you operate, it's hard to really think about it. It's a kind of it's a weird thing to say that you're thinking about the way you're thinking about things, but that is something that I think really propelled many of these thinkers, many of these philosophers, and I have been finding it very much a big proponent of my life over the past year, in a way that I can't really necessarily control per se. But reading this book again, it's just the amount of importance he puts to his thoughts and feelings, and just the experiences of, he talks about one of my favorite chapters in the book. He had really many interesting chapters here. One of my favorite chapters is when he talks about his travels, right? So he goes to different countries. He goes to India, he goes to Kenya, and he feels that he has been compelled somehow. He was somehow compelled to kind of go on this kind of journey of sorts to uncover mysteries that he doesn't seem to fully understand. But he felt like he had to kind of move to the east, and he's very much influenced by Arthur Schopenhauer, who I'm almost done reading his one of his book that I have over here. But it's very clear how well integrated Schopenhauer's works have been into Carl Jung's perspective on things, especially in the respective ideas of the mythology of spirituality and the spiritual experience. And he Carl Jung, in the very same vein as Schopenhauer, finds fascination with the East. So he goes to the East, to India and of all these sorts, to learn more about their religious cultures, and like Schopenhauer and how Schopenhauer kind of melded a lot of the Eastern and Western philosophies into a cohesive whole that was unique to himself. Carl Jung kind of takes those ideas and applies and finds ways in which they can turn into lenses for his own experience and his own understanding of his own, again, internal understanding of himself. So he would, for example, he'd find lots of resonance with the mandalas, for example, to the point that he came into the habit of drawing his own mandalas, and he even talks about in the book that his wife, he has like a bit of an argument with his wife about it, because I'm not sure if it was his wife or his girlfriend, but his significant other was finding that his mandalas were art. It was a piece of art that Jung felt so deeply perturbed by. He really just didn't feel like it was appropriate to call his mandalas art, because it was for him mostly just an expression of his psyche, and it was a pure kind of expression, condensation of his internal self, that to kind of aestheticize it to some degree felt like it was devaluing it. And I think that's one of the reasons why he broke up with this woman. But it would really sound kind of a petty thing, but he is such a deep thinker, and I have been very lucky, I think, to have been able to really give myself an amount of time and free space in my head to live with his thoughts about his own life, and some of the most important chapters I think everyone should read. He has 2 chapters towards the end that he wrote himself. Most of the book actually isn't written by him per se. It was written by another woman who was interviewing him over the course of a couple of years while he was in his 80s. But some of the chapters in the book he wrote himself, because he became so inspired by the process of being interviewed, and the process of recollecting about his own life inspired him to kind of write his own bits of condensation. So there are 2 chapters that are incredible, and I think I'll probably be rereading to the end of my days of sorts, but one of them is called On Life After Death. It's hard to read, I guess. It's kind of bright. On Life After Death. And the chapter after that it's called Late Thoughts. On Life After Death is a chapter in which he, as the title suggests, he contemplates on what, based on his whole understanding and his whole life and everything he's gone through and everything he's read about, everything he's experienced, he tries to tackle it head on, the question of what there is like, what life could possibly be after death, and he relates a lot of it to different kinds of dogmatic forms and different religions. He to the cyclical nature of like the Hindu Brahmins, to Christianity and the idea of the afterlife, the idea of perhaps he even talks a little bit about the possibility of again, the cyclical nature of death and rebirth, and he contemplates the possibility of the Hindu aspects of afterlife and the fact that of karma, which, if you're not familiar with it, is the idea that you kind of bring with you into the next life your past lives of sorts. It's like you keep flowing forward, I guess, to some degree, until you leave, until samsara, you leave the cycle of suffering of sorts. And he talks about perhaps he kind of tackles these different issues, and again with a very much of a strong sense of unknowing. He doesn't pretend like he knows. He gives suggestions of what he thinks possibly could be there, or what he seems to have been gravitating towards in terms of his own personal beliefs. I don't really want to elucidate here. I think you definitely just should read it. I think it's incredible to read. And I guess a summary of what he believes towards the end of his life and towards those last 2 chapters, and to kind of summarize it to some degree, he points to the importance of learning more about yourself. And it's very Eastern, I think, I guess, when you have different kind of Menchian kind of ways of thinking about philosophy. But he looks at it again he talks about the importance of being conscious of your unconscious. And he spent his whole life doing it, and he, towards the end of his life, that was still what he felt was most important. So I think it's very fascinating, and I did enjoy the book. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend all of it.